Remind you of our traditional December holiday dinner coming up on Saturday, December 4th. We're trying it on a Saturday this year. So LJ is taking the reservations. If you haven't signed up today here, you can find her, or if you're at home, please contact her and let her know that you'd like to come. And now I would like to introduce Charlene Moran, who is going to tell you about our exciting program today. Charlene.
Having managed to make a cheerful mess in here, but I think it'll turn out really well. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you've got your creative juices going, because we're going to all create something. If you don't want to, you're not going to have to, but you can watch as, people create something interesting for the holidays, including Hanukkah, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So we have lots of materials and supplies, and we're going to start out the program by introducing our two special guests, Diane Klenotic, I got it right, and Clivia Pasek. Diane is an employee owner of what we knew as Hadley Garden Center, but which is now known as the Gardener Supply at Hadley Garden Center. And she was gracious to agree to come to visit with us and share her expertise. She's been with the Hadley Garden Center and the new organization for a total of 33 years, so I think she's had a little experience with this. And Clivia is retired after 38 years from the Hadley Garden Center. You probably all recognize her. We remember her fondly. And if you haven't been in the store lately, you should go in. It is just stunning what they have done with it. So feel free to visit, and you now have somebody you can talk to in there. So without further ado, we'll turn things over to you two to show us how to create things in an easy and simple but elaborate, lovely way. Once we finish, after about 25 minutes or so, we're going to be moving around, and the tables are set up back there so that you're able to size up what we have and create something for yourself that you'll take home. We also have a drawing. As you know, you all put your names in the big brandy snifter, and we'll be drawing that at some point. Also, there's a little cafe set up in the library, so feel free to take refreshments anytime. It's just open from now on, and just enjoy and sit and chat and visit. It's going to be a long time before we're back together again. So, okay, and you have the floor.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say that I am going to be sort of explaining what Clivia does. Clivia is really the designer. She has offered to come and help me, but she's going to be like my silent partner today. So I'm going to be doing the speaking, and she's going to be doing the designing. So I'm going to just sort of explain in some ways what she's doing and show you how you can use maybe some things that you have in your yard and, put into an arrangement, or maybe some things that you have left over from the holidays, or, things that you might buy, and how you can turn them into a beautiful table arrangement. So we're just going to start with, she's going to start arranging something, what we would normally do at Hadley Garden Center when we would do make table arrangements that we would sell. And we would start just with a flat tray and some wet flower foam, and which we soak usually overnight or for just a few hours. And yeah, this is the way the wet flower foam usually comes. Usually comes in a brick like this. And those containers that Clivia is showing you, those take about a third of the brick. So you can, then after we make an arrangement in that, we'll show somebody very kindly brought in another container. So we'll show you how you might be able to make an arrangement with some containers that you have at home. You don't have to go out and buy a little plastic tray like that. So that's what we hope to achieve today. So you'll see we have the club members brought in some white pine and some berries, some hemlock. One of the things that I brought in from the garden center is the garden center sells bundles of balsam, and it's hard to find balsam just growing out, and it likes it really cold, and generally where we are now in Amherst, Northampton, Hadley, now zone 6, so it's getting warmer, so balsam doesn't do as well like the colder climates. But you can still find, like in Ashfield and some of the colder towns, you can find some balsam trees, but it's usually not something that you find growing very commonly around here down in the valley. But we sell it because it's what's known, where you get the beautiful fragrance. And so that's why we usually have it as part of our table arrangements, or that's what most of the wreaths are made of, balsam, because it's more fragrant than the white pine or the hemlock. And so in any case, so that's what Clivia is going to start with. So usually one of the things that I told Cliv that I was going to do was I was going to show everybody what not to do, because I'm not, it's not necessarily my strong suit, but designing. But so one thing is sort of like getting the right proportion. So she's going to show you how, when you're starting an arrangement like this, maybe what size, what length cuttings that you might want to start with. And basically for this, of course, you just need some pruners and some cuttings that you from stems that you gather from your yard or that you buy in a bundle from the store. It's going to show you what size, because if you want to start with something that the base might be a little bit longer, and as she progresses, I can show you why you want to start with something that's a little longer. I think mainly I've done it before, and if you start with pieces that are too small, it just forms like a ball shape, which isn't a bad thing, but you want a little, if it's for a table, you kind of usually want something that's a little bit flat. But so we pre-cut these balsams.
I was just gonna want to say the first thing,
Okay.
if you want candles, put them in first.
Okay.
Okay, this is not that simple. I've seen so many people start with putting the greens in, and then you can't get the candles in. You have to take all the greens out and stick the candles in.
And why is that though? The reason is because you stick the greens, you start to stick the greens into the side, and they're fairly big. The stems are kind of big, so you start to stick them in, and then they're taking up all this space in the center of the wet flower foam. So that's why when you would go to put your candles in, the greens would be clogging it. So anyway, that's another thing, is generally you're gonna, when you're cutting it, especially for the base pieces, the stems kind of are rather thick, but you don't want anything too thick, because if you start shoving in really thick pieces into the flower foam, it just breaks it up, and you just start over. But it happens. I've certainly done that before. But you can see she's sort of starting around the base by putting in a layer of balsam and the candles first.
Then just kind of making it too long, if you wanted the oblong to be in the middle of your table, then the next two sides will be short.
And I'm sorry. The other thing I was going to say is that initially you may think, Charlene very kindly brought up some sheet moss, which is green, and because you might think that you're going to see the OAC, a wet flower foam, because they're sticking greens in. But if you might be worried that you're going to see the wet flower foam, you could try piecing it, taking some of the sheet moss and making it damp first, like wetting it down so it's kind of soft, and you can hide some of the wet flower foam with the sheet moss, the dampened sheet moss. But a lot of times, once you get the evergreens in there, and then maybe you're going to add some berries or ribbon and pine cones, and we'll show you how to do all that, you won't even see the oasis. You'd be surprised at how it disappears. But this is also just very handy to have in case you have some spots that are open and you're going to try and cover it up. So it's always nice to have some moss on hand. And you can gather, like I live near the woods, And I've gone out and gathered moss off the frost, and it works very nicely too. It's just a kind of, you know, very damp and fresh, and you can use that as well to kind of cover the wet buffer zone.
The north side of your house.
A lot of the moss grows north side of trees. Does anybody know if they have any balsam growing out in there? Anybody live far enough north that they might have some balsam trees growing? No, usually you can tell because they're so fragrant. It's beautiful, but so you can see that even just for the base, I think Cliff's probably already used, I don't know, maybe 8 little pieces of balsam. So if you're out gathering, if you think about if you're going to make an arrangement or two in your house, you're going to want to gather a fair number of long stems, maybe some branches that you can cut into smaller pieces, because it does take quite a few greens to make one arrangement, even a little one. But once you get the base, then you can start to work with the smaller pieces, and you can, take one piece and cut it into 2, and so you can stretch it, because it can, if you can run into a lot of gathering of greens and pruning.
It does take a lot more than you think.
I'm just going to cut a few pieces here while she's. This is, somebody brought in some hemlock. Now that's an evergreen tree that grows all over, and it's actually a lovely tree. I love hemlock, but one thing is they're not fragrant really to speak of. The other thing is the greens are kind of flat instead of the balsam isn't quite as flat. The hemlock is a very flat type of green, so it makes it a little harder to use in arrangements, but you can still use it. You just have to cut more of it. But I'm setting that aside, and I'll show you later how Lydia, while she was sitting here, started just snipping little pieces of hemlock for a little tiny arrangement. So it works really well for that kind of thing. Yeah, so somebody brought in this little sled, and we put a little bit of oasis in there, wet flower cone in there, and Olivia got started putting some of the hemlock greens in there. And since this was just kind of like a tiny little ornament, she thought it would make a nice little arrangement on a table, and the flatness of the hemlock works really well because the container is so tiny. So while she's doing that, I can, one thing I can do, if anybody would like to, I can show you how you make bows at the garden center. I don't know if anybody is interested in learning how to make a bow, but I'll show you how. It took me 2 years to learn how to make a bow, and that's, and I tried really hard, but now I probably can make them in nicely, practically, but it's quite, maybe I'll take apart this. Yeah, I think I'll use the ribbon that I brought. So it's actually, here's a method to it all. All right, so I brought some ribbon here. So usually the standard bows that we have at the garden center have 8 loops. And so normally you essentially start with your ribbon. We'll see if we can get 8 loops out of this. Our standard bows are 8 loops and 3-foot long tails. But it depends on what people want. We also make bigger bows and little tiny bows, which actually are harder. The tiny ones where the ribbon is very narrow, it's very hard to make a bow out of that. But so you start with your ribbons with the sides, the front and not the back. You start with that, and you start by making a loop. And if you want a bow to be about like this big, which is our standard size for a wreath, you're gonna want the loops to be, I don't know, maybe that's a max 4 inches each loop. So you take that, you make a loop, and then the key is, there's 2 or 3 keys to making a bow. So the key is, the first thing is everything has to be twisted. So you start, even that initial loop, you have to twist. And that just enables it to be puffed up afterwards, and I'll show you what I mean. So then you make another loop, and you're gonna want that loop to be about the same size. And then you twist that again. So then we're gonna make another loop, and again with the twisting. And when the ribbon is wired, much easier to work with. It's because if you're holding 8 loops in your hands, it can be hard on your thumbs and fingers. And if it's velvet ribbon like this, which can be very thick and the back is slippery, it's a little bit harder to do, but you can do it. You know, you can do it with some practice. Or maybe people, there are other ways to make bows, but when the ribbon is wired, it makes it a lot easier. So we're gonna do that. This is the loops are just a tiny bit bigger. I'm making the loops just a tiny bit bigger than the first 2. So that's that one. So that's loop number 4. So again, we twist it. And then we twist it again. And then another twist. And another twist. And then we might have just enough for maybe some 3 8-inch tails. So what we normally do at the garden center is, so that the bows are kind of standard, we have the tail length about the same size, depending on the size of the bow. So you can see how it's starting to shape up. So it's very, almost, you know, very flat looking, and when the ribbon is wired. So this is where the tails are gonna come in. So I'm gonna make these tails about a foot long. So I'm gonna put that, you know what, I'm gonna make them 8 inches, because I don't think I have enough ribbon. So about 8 inches long. So there's one of those tails. And then you still have to twist it yet one more time. And then you have your, the backbone of the bow is ready. So the key to bow making, and this is one thing that Cody and I disagree on. Because it took me so long to learn how to make a bow. When you make the bow, you have to wire the loops together, right? And I always use 2 wires because I have to have the wire really tight. And so you take the wire, this is my 2 wires, and you wrap it around. And you have to, in order to fluff the bow, and I'll show you about that. So basically you take the wire and you put it around the back of the bow. And I then take, I don't even know if I have a pair of pliers here. I usually have pliers, or somebody with extremely strong hands. But almost 40 years of designing. She's got very brilliant. So then, because when you fluff it, if the wire is not tight, then the loops get rearranged and they don't come out very evenly. So I would take the needle nose pliers, and I would wrap what Clivia just did with her hands. I would just do with the needle nose pliers. And if you have 2 wires, then the wires won't break. But if I did that and I only had 1 wire, then looped around, then the wire would inevitably break, and it would break, and I would put all this work into this bow, and then the wire would break, and I would be very frustrated. So that's why I would normally have my pliers and to use 2 wires. But it does make, if you use 2 wires, then sometimes you can see it when you're in the center of the bow. You can sometimes see the wire because it's thicker. And I'm sure that's what Clivia was thinking. Well, you don't really want to see the wire, but most times you don't. So now the key. So now you have your 8 loops. So I take these 2 and I just kind of leave them in the center, and then I pull the next 2 down like that. and the other two basically are pulled up. And then, did somebody say there's an easier way? Good, good. I look forward to finding out what you're showing me, because I'm all for that. So then basically, then this is, let's see, where's my scissors? So we've got some scissors here. That'll work. All right. So then we have our tails and the bow, and now you have a nice substantial bow that shows up really quite nicely on a wreath. And, you know, of course, yeah, very nice. And the wire helps you. So if you want to reuse the bow next year, since it's wired, it's easy to fluff up, and then you just wire that on. But, well, in any case, so that's one way to make a bow. There are others. We also got we got a bow making machine a few years ago at the garden center, because one of the guys that I work with swore that a bow making machine would make it so much faster. So we did a test, and it doesn't make it any faster. Somebody tested making a bow with the bow making machine, which involves like peg and wrapping the ribbon in a peg, like over the pegs in a certain pattern, versus somebody just making one by hand, and it was no faster. It may have been easier, but it was no faster. Probably easier on your thumb and your forefinger, but
Yeah.
so.
Easier on the hand.
So here we have, Clem's got a great, beautiful arrangement. So this is balsam, and then somebody brought in some lovely white pine, which I think makes an awesome addition to a table arrangement, because it sort of softens it. And also white pine, so it has some fragrance. And then I cut some mountain laurel and brought that in, and so I just brought in some pieces. And these are all stems that are thick enough that you can stick the stems right into the wet flower bowl. So you can see how nice it is to have a green, like mountain laurel or holly or anything like that, which has a little different shape. It sort of makes it a little more, the arrangement a little more diverse, and it adds something to it when you have something other than a needled evergreen, but you have a broadleaf evergreen in it. Or you could use eucalyptus in an arrangement like that. That's also nice and easy to use, and adds a different look to an arrangement. Usually there's eucalyptus that's reddish, and this one looks like it might have a little bit of a bluish tinge to it. And if you did that, you could maybe use white candles or blue candles. But it's very pretty, and even just like this, I think it's beautiful. And
You get the idea.
yeah, you get the idea.
And things don't have to be perfect. I use a lot of bend pieces. You can see that it doesn't really,
Yeah, when
you won't know the difference.
Yeah, sort of, and you definitely at this point don't see any of the wet flower foam. I suppose if you like really peered into that while it was sitting on the table, you could find it. But so then she's adding just some natural pine cones. So I also brought up some glitter pine cones. These are pine cones that we sell at the garden center that are already on a pick. They're painted and they're just in glitter. But the pine cones that you might gather out in your yard, I'm just gonna pull this back out. So if you have, so a lot of them, the destroyer of a reason. A lot of them that are almost too big for some arrangements. Like even a lot of the pine cones that we sell at the store are really big. So when I picked through the ones, because they're usually for wreaths, which the bigger pine cones look great on a wreath, but for table arrangements, sometimes the bigger pine cones work, sometimes they don't. But so if you have pine cones, the way to get it into the table arrangement is to take the cone and my box. Well, I'll use this.
I have the brown one.
Oh, great. Yeah, so these are some pine cones that I just brought, and somebody brought some white painted pine cones too.
I just stuck my head to,
Yeah.
to see the difference.
Yeah. So you have your pine cone like this, and you can just start with just plain piece of wire, and wire the base of the cone, just like that. You won't even see the wire. And then in a pinch, if you didn't have a pick, you could probably stick that right into the foam, and it would hold for a while, probably for long enough. But it's so thin, it might start to come out of the flower foam. But so that's why normally when we would make them, we would take the pine cones, wire them, and then we would put them on these little picks, this little green stem, this little sticks that maddeningly break when you when you start to wire and try to put some pressure on it. But so yeah, so basically while we were waiting when we first got here, Sylvia was taking some of these pine cones and wiring them and putting them on picks. So that just makes it easier to put in an arrangement. I don't know where you want to put that, but it looks lovely already. But so the other thing that sometimes people add to table arrangements are the berries. Of course, this is somebody brought in some lovely winter berries, so it's fresh. And so even something like this is fairly solid stem, so that you could probably just stick right into the flower arrangement and just like maybe like that. And that's great if you have access to winterberry, which is beautiful. This year's a great year for winterberry. All the rain that we had this summer, those winterberries looking very beautiful and very thick. I mean, we sell bunches at the garden center, but you know, you often can see it growing somewhere where you legally want to be picking it. But it's nice in an arrangement. But if you didn't have access to winterberry, you can always, there's always artificial berries that you can buy. We sell bundles of red berries. These are just simply berries that are on these little pies that are, they just come on, like each stem has 2 little berries on it. So Sylvia makes great use of them, and just take like maybe a bundle of 3 little stems, and again, you'll be wiring it onto a pick, and then you can just tuck it in the arrangement for a little bit of color. It's actually really stands out, even though it just seems like so small, but it stands out quite nicely. And somebody brought in this little dried piece, which is, we were commenting that if you wanted to use something like this, you could actually cut it into 3 different pieces and stretch it, rather than just using one piece like that. You could use those 3 pieces, and it will look really nice like that. And some other things that you might want to put in an arrangement, little birds. We sell them they sell them at Michael's, we sell them at the store. These are birds that are on little clips, but if you find one of the birds, like we also sell them, they're not on clips, they're just made out of foam though, and you can just put a pick right in the bottom. If this one wasn't on a clip, I would show you, but you could just put one of these picks right in the bottom of the foam, and then it would stick right into the arrangement. Makes it real easy, but these birds are really a cute addition, and they kind of very natural. There's cardinals or chickadees or all kinds of interesting things that you can add. And another thing that you can add are what we call flags. So it's just using some ribbon that you might have on hand, and it's just taking a piece that might be 10 inches, just 10 inches, and just cutting it, and she's going to fold. She's going to cut the bottom, I guess, so it looks a little bit nicer. So you just fold it and turn it into a flag. So basically what you do, and she'll show you this too, but you would take your piece and you would just wire the part where you folded it over, and then put that on a little pick, and then you would tuck it in the arrangement, and it's just a nice little bit of color. And you know, a lot of times, like I save the ribbon. I have so much ribbon now, and but it's nice to be able to use it in just little pieces. I have ribbon up here, which people feel free to take. I brought some from my stash. I have more back here, but it's nice to use in a table arrangement. I think in many instances, a full bow is too big for a table arrangement. So if you use these little pieces of ribbon, It adds a little bit of color or, you know, a little pizzazz depending on what type of ribbon you have. And somebody brought these cute little glass balls in here. There's these are almost like the type that you would hang on a tree. They are the type that you would hang on a tree. So we sell them at the store and they just on wires, but it doesn't matter. You can use these by just taking the ornaments and just putting them on a wire, and then you can either put the wire right into the flower foam again, or you wire it to a pick. But it sort of adds a nice little bit of, you know, they're usually shiny, so they can make an arrangement stand out. Doesn't have, you know, sometimes people want to go with all natural, and sometimes you might want something that's a little shiny, but yeah, it's nice, you know, nice to add a little bit of bang to the arrangement. But does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Excuse me, yes, I do. I was noticing, when you hook those things on, that you've got your thingy, and you've got a couple of wires hanging down from it. Are you just going around and around and around in the same place?
Yes, pretty much. You just sort of like put it on the pick and you start at the top and you just wrap it around. You'll slowly be working your way down the pick a little bit. Just basically it's just going around and around and around. And that's why it's helpful to have wire that's not too extremely long. I mean, we usually cut it to this length, but there's wire that's cut like this long, and that means you have an awful lot of wire that you're wrapping around the pick. So you could pre-cut the wire, and that will make it go a little faster when you're making the arrangement. You sort of do a little prep work.
And also had another one, the amount of foam that you put in that little plastic thing, and it's wet. So how long is that going to keep that arrangement wet? Do you have to add?
You have to add
to it?
water eventually, but not as much as you think. One thing is how hot is your room?
Yeah.
If your room is warm, you could even, if you don't have things on it that'll disintegrate, you could actually mist it ever so often. Give it a little more humidity, or put it somewhere cooler while you're not entertaining and bring it out for that night. But, you know, you can put your finger in and feel the foam.
Yeah.
And it's, you know,
And when you do water, if you just water the center, it'll get nice and damp. And it's like I have a wood stove in my house right in the center of the living room, and it dries everything out. So, you know, I would probably water something like that every 3 days or so. But it does hold on to the moisture for a lot longer than you might think.
Yeah.
So this is a very lovely basic clivia arrangement. So you can come up and take a look at that at some point. I just wanted to mention a couple other things. I don't know where we are for time, but somebody brought this little lovely container in, and I just wanted to show how so the thing about it is that the Oasis, like, this was from a block, so but 1/3 was used in that arrangement, so this is basically 2/3 of the block. But if you go to put it in this way into the container, it sinks down too much. You don't have enough of the foam sitting up. So, you know, if we were at the store, we would probably put something under there to rise it up a little bit. But you can sort of do the same thing, just sort of by wedging it in. It'll stay there. It's wedged in quite nicely, just so that you have a little bit more Oasis to work, so that you can put the greens in and form a little bit of the flat base, and then fill it in on the top. But you definitely need to have some of the Oasis sticking up above whatever container you want to use. So,
Excuse me, Diane.
Yes.
Can you tell a little about the garden
the Oasis,
center? Well,
yes, we do. We do sell it. Yes, we sell it in blocks. Yes, and also for dried flowers, but most of the time, you know, people don't use it for dried flowers. But there's a different type of foam, but usually it'll say wet flower foam on there. You don't want to get the wrong foam, or you won't be happy about that.
You can also see that a small container can make a fairly substantial.
True.
You don't need a big container, or else you're gonna have to make it really big and make it.
Yeah, because this size container, you're already looking at something that's going to have some height to it and some width, because but that, you know, it's very cute, and you can make that work, but it would take a lot more grease substantial amount of green.
How about if you want to make a ball, you were talking about, don't make a ball, but. how about
Yeah,
if you want to
make
make
your
a ball?
greens short.
To start by, instead of cutting,
So, you don't have to have a ball piece of oasis.
No,
right, good point,
everything
good
is
point.
always square. It
Everything,
doesn't matter.
yeah, you can totally make it.
And
That's like with peeling balls that people
Right.
have.
Yeah.
If you took it all apart, you'd find a big square piece of styrofoam.
What would you have to do to make a topiary where you've got one ball and another ball? How much support would you have to have in that?
Well, whatever you're using is the stem,
Okay.
because the foam is not so bad. I mean, it's hard to do fresh flower foam. They do sell the things already,
That way.
yeah, so that you can just,
They sell that fresh flower foam in a ball, that would be the easiest thing, although you could take a square of that and press the sides in a little bit and
But it doesn't, it's you who's gonna make the circle.
yeah, the shorter you cut the pieces, the more ball shape you can make it. Yeah, yeah.
And the rule of thumb for table arrangement too is that you don't want your table arrangement to be any higher from your elbow to here, or else you can't see across the table. If you have something tall, then you have to have it very tall, so that there's only one little thing from you and the person across from you. So it's kind of a rule of thumb that we can see over.
Yeah.
What size gauge wire are you using to raise the ribbon?
Oh, that's a good question. Generally, we sell a 22 gauge and 24 gauge. And I think the 22 is fine, especially if you're gonna double it. But, the 20, no, I've got that backwards. It's the opposite. The lower the number, the thicker the wire. So this is probably a 24. We do sell 22, and I like the 22 for making a wreath. You know, if you're wrapping greens around a wire, you need something a lot thicker or stronger. So the lower gauge wire is gonna be thicker, but this is probably a 24. But, it's nice and sturdy and just holds it just long enough. So Charlene had mentioned, I can do this real quick. Charlene had just brought in a wreath, and we sort of took the old bow off of it, and we were gonna use, well, Clivia was sitting here, I brought this ribbon in, and we were gonna make a little bit of a wreath here. So we're gonna start with, should we start with the bow, or should we start with the bow on last?
Well, we put it on first so we knew
Okay.
where to place it.
So the thing, one thing, if you came, yes, if you came to the store and you said, oh, can you decorate a wreath for me? The first thing they'll ask you is where you want the bow, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6,
Oh, we're
9. So we're on the top, right? So, the
Yeah,
top.
I'm doing that. So
Yeah, so we made a bow there, and I just wanted to show you how you might be able to use pine cones in a wreath, or little ornaments, like I think Charlene brought this in, or somebody brought this in, we're gonna use that in a wreath. And, so we're gonna do some pine cones. So the pine cones, Clint's gonna wire, but I'll show what she's doing kind of.
all the way around,
Yeah.
or just cluster.
Cluster. So the pine cones, usually at this point, you can start to use a little bit bigger pine cones than for the arrangements, especially because, some of the wreaths 14 inches, get really big. So you want big pine cones. And you can also use the white pine cones, which are around here. The white pines that are kind of long, they have a nice fragrance to them, but usually you should bake them first. Makes the house smell really great, but it opens them up a little bit.
And it dries fast.
So it's not
I
sticky.
actually was at the garden center, I was microwaving it.
Microwave it, right.
In a plastic bag, open it, and for, I don't remember, 2 minutes.
Maybe 2 minutes in a microwave. It takes the white pines.
The sap gets absorbed, and it's not as sticky.
Right, the white pine is very resiny and will be sticky.
Very sticky, and it actually shines it, because the sap kind of
Very
gets
nice,
smooth, so you get these little shiny tips.
very natural. I love the white pine cones in a wreath, very natural. But these, the way to use a pine cone in a wreath is basically to take the pine cone as is, or sometimes you can take, and basically, again, like I showed you earlier, put a piece of wire on the bottom and wrap it around a few times. And a lot of times we either put the pine cones on singly or we put them in clusters of 3, depending on how big the wreath is. So then you would just take that and just wrap it around a couple times, and then you should wire that right onto the wreath. And you'll see when Clivia's got the finished product here, but just wrap that right around onto the wreath like that, and it holds tight, and it lasts longer than you want it to. I'm sure by, March, you'll be looking at your wreath and, okay, it starts to fall apart now. But no, so that's the way to kind of get a nice cluster of 3 pine cones, or maybe you just want to put them on singly. And then the things like the mountain laurel stems, or if you want to take the wreath like that Charlene brought in and take some white pine clippings. So these, if we're at the store and we're decorating wreaths, we normally put these in a pick machine. It's just a machine that you put the greens in, and it attaches a very sharp metal piece of, like almost just like a little prong onto that, and it allows you to stick it right into the wreath. But these, if you had mountain laurel or the white pines, the stems are sturdy enough that you could probably stick them right into the wreath without having a pick machine to do it. Or if it seemed like they were just, like here, you can see this, when this wreath was made, they took clumps of the evergreens and they wired it on. So you could find where that wire is and just stick the greens right there, trying to see like Sylvia did. And the stems are strong enough that they'll hold real nice. You don't have to have a pick machine for that.
It's convenient, but they also can cost $200.
Yeah. They break down, and then they break down at the wrong time.
Right around Christmas.
Right around Christmas, yeah. So Cliff's kind of going to put some evergreens in there, and then we'll work with a little ornament and show you. It's kind of easy to do. And I was gonna see if there's another thing that somebody brought in, which I put on my wreath before, are bells, very easily wired on, really nice. Sometimes you can just wire them on, or sometimes you can just take ribbon. It looks really pretty with a thin piece of ribbon just hanging right on the wreath, and it's really sweet. And I always like to have some of the bells on my wreath every year. Yeah. So any other questions?
I think it's time for us to get creative too, and maybe eat. So, I want to thank you both so much, and we're going to present you with an airport. Thank you. Thank you. And also, I hope you'll hang around and help us. We're going to be back at those tables, so anybody who wants to create anything, come and create something. We will help. Okay, yeah. And we have 2 experts here. Yes.
That was.
That's a nice way to turn it.
Yeah, that's really even the laurel and the